Hey everyone, first day of the anatomy unit here. We'll talk about the digestive system. If you guys watched the intro video or if your teacher posted the intro video, um, we talked about how we'll talk about each one of these systems located throughout our body over the next 4 days. Today we're going to start with the digestive system and go from there. So feel free as we go through to pause me if you want. Promise I won't mind. You can pause it if I'm going too fast, if you want to take a break, anything like that. Just whatever you need to do so that you stay actively engaged and listening to what I'm talking about so that we can get through this. And I'll try to keep it as short as I can because I know that it's hard to listen to me for a super long period of time, especially when you're just staring at a slide, listening to somebody talk. So let's dig into the digestive system. And like I said, I'm going to go pretty quick. So if you need to pause it, make sure to do so that you can take some notes to use on those quizzes later. So the main idea behind the digestive system is your entire body needs food, but food only enters one system, and that system is the digestive system. Okay, out of all the systems that we'll talk about over the next 4 days, the only one that food enters is the digestive system. So the functions of the digestive system is to convert food into small molecules that can be used by the cells of the body. So when I say small molecules, what I'm talking about is if you think back to like the first unit that I did, way back when we talked about cells, we talked about 4 small molecules. See if you can think of what those are. If you said proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and nucleic acids, you'd be right. Okay, those are the small molecules that we're going to talk about. And there are 4 phases to the digestive system: ingestion, digestion, absorption, and elimination. You don't need to write those down right now because we're going to talk about each one in a little bit more depth in the coming slides. So the first phase is known as ingestion, and that's just the process of putting food into your mouth. This process right here, this phase, is the reason that the digestive system is my favorite system. Okay, it's my favorite because that means you get to eat. And my favorite part of the digestive system is ingesting the food because then I get to taste it, and I really like food. I don't really know somebody that doesn't like food. So this is a great part of what we're learning today. Okay, putting food into your mouth. The next phase is known as digestion. And as food passes through the digestive system, it is broken down in 2 ways. Okay, there's mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. So mechanical digestion is the physical breakdown of large pieces of food into smaller pieces of food. So think about whenever you put food into your mouth, you probably chew it up. Okay, that is mechanical digestion because you are physically breaking the food into smaller pieces. The other type of digestion is chemical digestion. And this is when enzymes break down food into the small molecules that the body can use. So when we use the enzymes that we produce in our body to break down these foods into the proteins, fats, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, all that, when we break it down into that, that is known as chemical digestion. Next phase is absorption. So this takes place after the food has been broken down into smaller pieces. Okay, so we've already broke the food down into smaller pieces. And this happens in the small intestine where the molecules enter the circulatory system. So the small intestine absorbs those small molecules and puts them into the circulatory system. And the circulatory system takes them all over your body to wherever they're needed. And I know we're talking about the digestive system today, but notice that I mentioned the circulatory system there. That's because all of these systems work on each other, okay? They help each other out. In this case, the digestive system absorbs the nutrients and puts them into the circulatory system. And we'll talk about all of that more when we get to the circulatory system. And then there's elimination. Not all food can be broken down and absorbed, okay? So, we take out as many of those small molecules as we can and take all of the nutrients out of our food, but not all of the food can be broken down. So anything we don't use passes through the large intestine and passes out as feces. If you don't know what feces is, it's poop, okay? So that's how we get rid of anything that we don't use. All right, so a deeper look. Our digestive system is built around a one-way tube that passes throughout the body. Then the food travels through the mouth, esophagus, stomach, and small intestine, and then it ends up going into the large intestine as well. So, let's think about this. It's a little mind bender. You don't need to write down any of this. It's just something kind of fun to think about. So if the digestive system is a tube that goes through your whole body, does the food you eat ever actually enter your body? Think about that for a second. We have a hole into our body where we put food in, which is our mouth, and we have a hole in our body that passes food out, which is at the end of the large intestine at the rectum. So we just have this hole that goes through our entire body, right? Kind of. I mean, there's different valves and things that close it off, but should that tube really be considered inside our body? I don't know. Like I said, not a big deal, just something kind of fun to think about. And hopefully you found it somewhat interesting. All right, so let's start talking about the whole digestive process and looking at it even deeper. So let's talk about what happens in the mouth. So you put food into your mouth, teeth start breaking down the food that you put into your mouth. Is this mechanical or chemical digestion? I just asked you a little bit ago, or I just told you the answer a little bit ago. So see if you can think of it now. If you said that it is mechanical digestion, you are right, because we are physically breaking down the food that we put into our mouth. Then the saliva that's in our mouth, this is what it does. Release of saliva is controlled by the nervous system. Okay, once again, I'm talking about another system that we will have an entire lecture over, but that's how it's related. This saliva contains an enzyme known as amylase, which breaks down the chemical bonds in starches to form sugars. Okay? And then the clump of food when you swallow is called a bolus. So just let's go back up to saliva. Already in your mouth, chemical digestion is occurring. That mixture of saliva with your food is a form of chemical digestion because it is breaking down the chemical bonds in starches to form sugars. So as soon as you put food in your mouth, you're already going through mechanical and chemical digestion. Then we get to the esophagus. So the esophagus is the tube that takes the food from your throat to your stomach. Peristalsis. What this is, that is the term used for contractions of smooth muscles that force the food down your throat. Okay, so there are muscles that force food down your throat. You don't have to actively think about contracting those muscles, like you have to think about contracting your bicep or anything like that. It just happens. That's why, don't try this. Please don't try this. But that's why if you stand on your head and eat food and swallow it, the food still goes down your throat. Gravity isn't what takes food down your throat. Those muscles contracting forces the food down your throat. And that takes us to the cardiac sphincter. And what that is, it's a thick ring of muscles that closes off the esophagus. Right at the end of the esophagus, right before it gets to your stomach, there's a thing called the cardiac sphincter, and it closes off that esophagus. So here's a picture of all of that. You can see the esophagus up at the top on the zoomed in version. And right there where it says esophageal sphincter, that's just another term for the cardiac sphincter. I'm going to call it the cardiac sphincter because it's a little bit easier to say, and I think it's a little bit easier to remember. So just think, right at the top of the stomach, there's the cardiac sphincter. Now what this does, it closes off the esophagus and stops stomach acid and junk from coming up out of your stomach into your esophagus. When that happens, when some stomach acid is able to get through that sphincter, that's what causes heartburn. So really, heartburn has nothing to do with the heart. It's just your esophagus getting kind of burned in a way. Okay. All right, so real quick, if you would like, pause this right now, go grab a snack and bring it back here. Don't eat it till you get back because I'm going to talk about it a little bit, and we're going to kind of do a little bit of interactive stuff. If you don't want a snack right now, you don't have to. You'll still get the main concept of the idea. But I'm going to grab a snack because I like to eat. So go ahead, pause it right now, and we will come back and talk about this. All right, so if you went and got a snack, I just ate my snack. I didn't want to talk with food in my mouth, but go ahead and take a bite now, and we'll kind of talk about it. So go ahead, take a bite of your snack, and we'll just keep on going. So when you took that bite of your snack, so far what's happened is our snack has underwent ingestion because we put the food in our mouth. Okay? Ingestion is the process of putting food in your mouth, so you did that. We have also began the digestive process when it was partially, mechanically, and chemically digested. So like we talked about earlier, chewing your food is a form of mechanical digestion, and when it mixes with the saliva, that is a form of chemical digestion. So you've already started doing that with your snack. The food probably spent less than a minute in your mouth, okay? Unless you chew for a ridiculously long time, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you probably only chewed for a few seconds with that first bite. Each bite only takes a few seconds for you to chew up and swallow. So it probably spent less than a minute in our mouth. And then when you swallowed, it only takes 2 to 3 seconds for it to pass through our esophagus. Doesn't take very long for it to go down that tube. So now our snack, or at least the first bite of your snack, is in your stomach. So that leads me to my next slide here, talking about the stomach. Okay, our snack is in our stomach right now, so what's a better time to talk about it than now? So the stomach is a large muscular sac that continues chemical and mechanical digestion. So the first thing is chemical digestion. The stomach contains an enzyme called pepsin that breaks down proteins. So the chemical digestion of proteins starts here in the stomach. Your stomach also performs mechanical digestion because the stomach has 3 muscle layers that thoroughly churn and mix the swallowed food, breaking it down further. Okay, so your stomach's just kind of moving around, breaking down the food into even smaller pieces. And what this does, it creates a mixture called chyme. After an hour or two, the pyloric sphincter opens and the chyme moves into the small intestine. The pyloric sphincter, that's just another thing, just like the cardiac sphincter, except for it's at the bottom of the stomach and leads into the small intestine. And I think I've got a picture here coming up that you can see that. So yeah, here's the picture I was talking about. You can see up at the top, the esophagus, which we just talked about, the lower esophageal sphincter, which we call the cardiac sphincter, the stomach, everything we just talked about in that. And then down at the bottom, kind of left side of it is the pyloric sphincter. Okay, so that's what cuts off your stomach from your small intestine. Right where that says duodenum. We'll talk about the duodenum here in just a second when we talk about small intestine. But that's the start of the small intestine. So the pyloric sphincter cuts off the stomach from the start of the small intestine. So let's go back and reference our snack. So the snack is going to spend the next 2 to 4 hours in our stomach. So it's got quite a while that's just going to sit there in our stomach. All right, so after our snack moves out of our stomach, it's going to enter the small intestine. So let's talk about the small intestine. So chyme enters the duodenum after passing through the pyloric valve. So that pyloric valve that's located right in between the small intestine and the stomach lets the chyme through into the duodenum. Okay, the duodenum is just the word for the start of the small intestine. While it's sitting there in the duodenum, right at the beginning of the small intestine, the pancreas creates enzymes that break down carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. The liver produces bile, which is stored in the gallbladder and helps with fat digestion by breaking up globs of fats, and the gallbladder releases bile into the small intestine. So all of that happens right there at the beginning of the small intestine in that area known as the duodenum. Okay, so we're talking about the small intestine here, but the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder also play a major role in the digestive system, specifically when food is in the small intestine. So here's a picture of all that I just talked about, and I know it's kind of blurry, but you'll still kind of get the point here if you can make out the words. So you can see the small intestine there. It's kind of that pink tube that's all bunched up there in the middle of all those organs. You can also see the pancreas, the gallbladder, and the liver. So you can see the liver, it creates that bile and stores it in the gallbladder, and the gallbladder holds on to that until it needs to be released into the small intestine when food is sitting there in the duodenum. The pancreas, you can also see the pancreas there. Okay? So that leads us into our next phase, which is absorption. This mainly occurs in the small intestine. Most nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. When I'm talking about nutrients, I'm talking about the proteins, carbs, lipids, nucleic acids, all of that good stuff. So, chyme moves out of the duodenum and is now ready to be absorbed. So remember, the duodenum is the very first part of the small intestine. Okay, it is part of the small intestine. We just call it the duodenum. So, chyme moves out of that duodenum and it's now ready to be absorbed. How does it get absorbed? Well, there's these things called villi that have microvilli attached to them. And these microvilli are what absorb the nutrients. I've got a picture on the next slide that'll kind of show you what these look like and hopefully clear that up a little bit. So wave-like contractions move the chyme along the surface. And when the chyme is ready to move out of the small intestine, it's basically nutrient-free. The small intestine, those microvilli that are located in there, absorb pretty much all of the nutrients that we can get out of our food. Okay, so here is that picture that I talked about. And you can see the villi and microvilli. I'm going to start on the left-hand side of this picture and kind of work through. So you can see there in that little blue circle that is the small intestine. Okay, so each one of these pictures, as you progress further and further to the right, it is more and more zoomed in. So we start off there on the far left, picture of the small intestine. If you zoom in on that, you can see the folds of the small intestine. Okay, we have those little folds, and like I said, they move in wave-like contractions to help move the chyme along throughout the small intestine. If we zoom in on one of those little things that's sticking off of the folds, those are known as villi. I'm looking at the third picture from the left right now, the one that says villus underneath. That is a villi, okay? And then if we zoom in even further on that to one of those things that are like sticking off of the villi, they kind of look like little hairs. Those are microvilli. So you can look at the picture to the far right now and see the microvilli. And those microvilli are what absorb the nutrients. All right, so let's talk about that snack that we ate. And that snack is going to spend about 3 to 5 hours in our small intestine. So it spends quite a bit of its time there. All right, so that takes me to absorption from the large intestine. So I said, that most absorption occurs in the small intestine, but some also occurs in the large. So when chyme leaves the small intestine, it enters the large intestine. Remember, at this point, that chyme is basically nutrient-free. There's hardly anything left in it that we can use for our body. Okay? The large intestine's main function in absorption is to remove water from the undigested materials. So in that chyme, there's still water left in it, because in the small intestine, it absorbed proteins, fats, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, all that. It absorbed all of that, but what's left is water, and the large intestine absorbs that water. That takes me to elimination. Elimination occurs in the large intestine. So whatever is left over is passed into the rectum and is eliminated from the body in the form of feces. Okay, so that's how we get rid of any of the chyme that's left over, that doesn't have any nutrients left in it. Okay, that's how we get rid of it. Let's think about this. What do you think happens if the large intestine doesn't absorb enough water? If it leaves too much water in that chyme, what do you think happens? If you said that this is what results in, or what causes diarrhea, you were right. Okay, I know it's gross. I know that that's gross to think about, but that's exactly what happens. Your large intestine doesn't absorb enough water and causes you to have diarrhea. What happens if too much water is absorbed? Well, let's just think the complete opposite. What do you think is the complete opposite of diarrhea? If you said constipation, then you're right there as well. If the large intestine takes too much water out, you get constipated. I know those two things are pretty gross to think about, but I just wanted to point out to show you how important the large intestine's job really is. Because we want it to we want to do its job correctly. It's not very fun if it doesn't. So hopefully the large intestine absorbs the right amount of water and we don't have to deal with that. All right, so here is a picture of everything that we've talked about so far, all connected together. So you can see the mouth up at the top, the esophagus, which is the tube leading down to the stomach, and then the stomach leads into the small intestine. You can see right there the gallbladder, the liver, and the pancreas all located right up there toward the top of the small intestine. You can see the large intestine, which the small intestine is attached to, and you can see the anus, which is where the rectum's located and where we eliminate all of that extra chyme. Okay, so one thing I'd like to talk about while we're on this picture is if you're looking at them side by side, you might notice that the small intestine, if you stretched it out, would be a lot longer than the large intestine. So that brings me to the question, well, why in the world did they name it the small intestine? Well, those terms are actually referring to the diameter of the tube. Okay, so if you look, the large intestine is a lot bigger around than what the small intestine is. So that's what they're talking about whenever they say small and large intestine, is the diameter of the tube and not the length. I know that can get confusing sometimes, but that's how it's named. So just try to remember that, and hopefully it'll help you remember in the future. So let's go back here to our snack that we ate. So the snack is going to spend anywhere from 10 hours to several days in our large intestine. I know that's a huge variation in amounts of time, but everybody's a little bit different based on how often you have a bowel movement. I know that's disgusting to think about and really talk about, but it's reality. So that food that you ate just a little bit ago, if you ate a snack with us, we'll spend anywhere from 10 hours to several days in our large intestine based on what's normal for you. All right, and this last picture, you might notice that you've seen it before. And that's because in one of my lectures back in my very first unit, I put it up there and I told you then, I was going to refer to it now because it connects everything that I've talked about so far. You know, way back in my first lecture of my first unit, we talked about subatomic particles. That's the protons, neutrons, electrons, and those make up an atom, which makes up molecules or compounds, which makes up organelles, and organelles are like the little things that are inside of the cell and that have their own specific job. Organelles make up a cell, cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, and organs are all the things we talked about today, like the stomach and pancreas and liver and all that. All of those are organs, and they're made up of tissues. A bunch of organs working together makes up an organ system. We talked about the digestive system today. The digestive system is an organ system. Okay, so all these different systems that we'll talk about in the coming days, they're all a different type of organ system. And all of those organ systems working together makes up an organism. Okay, and we are organisms. So we have all of those different, we have all of those different systems working together that make up us, make us who we are, and make us functional human beings. So that's kind of how it all links together. But that's all I've got for you today. So make sure if you want to go back and listen to it again, you can listen to it as many times as you want. I'll repeat myself as many times as you want me to. But make sure you get down some good notes so that you can do good on the quiz that's coming after this lecture. But that's all I've got. Have a great day, and talk to you tomorrow.